The tropical mist clings to the jungle floor like smoke from a funeral pyre. It's 2:47 a.m., August 21st, 1942, and the air on Guadalcanal tastes of salt, rotting vegetation, and something else, anticipation sharp as a bayonet's edge. Captain Haruki Nishimura crouches behind a fallen palm log, its bark still oozing sap from where American artillery shattered it days ago. His fingers trace the familiar outline of his Type 99 Arisaka rifle, 7 pounds of precision engineering that has served the Emperor faithfully from Manchuria to the Philippines. The bolt slides smooth as silk in his practiced hands, click, clack, the sound of Japanese military dominance for 40 years. Around him, 917 soldiers of Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki's 28th Infantry Regiment lie in wait, their Arisakas gleaming dully in the pre-dawn darkness. These are not green recruits. These are the Sendai Division, veterans who crushed Chinese resistance at Marco Polo Bridge, who swept through Southeast Asia like a divine wind. Each man carries the confidence of unbroken victory and the certainty that American Marines, isolated and demoralized, will break like waves against Japanese steel. Nishimura adjusts his grip on the rifle's familiar stock. 5 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 6 shots before he must work the bolt, reload, and fire again. But 6 shots from a master marksman are 6 dead enemies. This is the way of the samurai warrior, the way of precision over brute force. Through the humid air comes the whisper of Colonel Ichiki's voice. Remember, these Americans have been cut off for weeks. They are hungry, frightened, probably down to their last ammunition. Intelligence reports no reinforcements, no hope. We will drive them into the sea by sunrise. The plan is beautiful in its simplicity. Charge across the sandbar at the mouth of this creek the Marines call Alligator, a fitting name for where American resistance will die. Their bolt-action rifles, if they have any ammunition left, cannot match the disciplined fire of Japanese veterans. Each of Nishimura's men can work their Arisaka bolts with mechanical precision, sending aimed fire that has broken every enemy they've faced. But something feels different tonight. During the reconnaissance yesterday, the sounds from the American positions weren't quite right. Not the sharp crack of bolt-action rifles they expected, but something else, a different rhythm, a strange popping cadence that didn't match any weapon in Japanese intelligence files. Nishimura shakes off the unease. Fear is the enemy of the warrior. His Arisaka has never failed him. Accurate to 500 meters, reliable in jungle conditions, battle-tested across a dozen campaigns. What could a few desperate American Marines possibly field that would matter against the fury of the Imperial Army? The order comes down the line in hushed whispers. Prepare to attack. But as Captain Nishimura chambers his first round, he has no idea. He's about to encounter a weapon that will shatter everything the Japanese military believes about infantry combat and change the course of the Pacific War forever. How could he know that in just minutes, the sound of American firepower would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his life? The confidence flowing through Japanese ranks isn't unfounded. It's built on a foundation of tactical doctrine that has conquered half of Asia. For decades, Japanese military philosophy has centered on one core principle: the supremacy of the disciplined marksman over crude volume of fire. Lieutenant Hiroshi Matsumoto, Ichiki's operations officer, had briefed the assault force just hours earlier with charts and diagrams spread across a makeshift table. The American Marines are equipped with the same bolt-action rifles we faced everywhere else, he'd explained, pointing to intelligence photographs of M1903 Springfield rifles. One shot, work the bolt. One shot, work the bolt. Our rate of trained fire equals theirs, but our spirit and tactical superiority will overwhelm them. This wasn't Japanese arrogance. This was military reality based on 4 years of continuous victory. At Marco Polo Bridge, Japanese Arisaka fire had shattered Chinese formations. In the Philippines, they'd outshot American and Filipino defenders armed with identical bolt-action technology. The Type 99 Arisaka in their hands represented the culmination of Japanese small arms development, a rifle that could deliver precise, sustained fire in the hands of soldiers trained from childhood in the warrior's way. Sergeant Kenji Tanaka checks his ammunition pouches for the 4th time, 120 rounds in stripper clips, each one hand-loaded by skilled workers in Osaka. His Arisaka Type 99 gleams with the deep blue-black finish that speaks of quality metallurgy and precision manufacturing. 7 pounds of Japanese steel that has never jammed, never failed, never let down a soldier of the Emperor. "Sergeant San," whispers Private Yamamoto, barely 18, but already a veteran of the Bataan Peninsula. The Americans sound different than the Filipinos. Their firing patterns yesterday? Silence, Tanaka hisses back, but privately, he's noticed it too. During the probe at Coley Point, when Captain Brush's Marine Patrol had ambushed their reconnaissance, the sound of American rifles hadn't matched expectations. Not the measured crack-pause crack of bolt-action fire, but something faster. Something that made his veterans' instincts twitch with unease. But surely it was nothing. Intelligence had been clear. The American Marines were equipped with standard M1903 Springfield rifles, the same weapon they'd carried since 1903. Bolt-action, 5-round magazine, requiring manual cycling between shots just like their own Arisaka. The Americans might fight with desperate courage, but they couldn't change the laws of mechanical engineering. Colonel Ichiki himself moves among the troops, his presence radiating the confidence that has carried him through China, through the conquest of Guam, through every victory in his distinguished career. At 44, he is the embodiment of Japanese military excellence, a warrior scholar who has studied every aspect of modern warfare and found the Americans wanting. Remember, he tells his company commanders in a voice barely above a whisper, the enemy is isolated, demoralized, and running low on supplies. Their rifles require the same manual operation as ours, but they lack our discipline, our training, our warrior spirit. When we charge across that sandbar, our superior marksmanship and fighting spirit will break their will in minutes. It's a doctrine that has worked flawlessly for 4 years of war. Japanese soldiers, trained to fire 15 aimed rounds per minute with their bolt-action rifles, had consistently outfought enemies armed with similar weapons. The secret wasn't just the rifle. It was the man behind it. Japanese marksmen could work a bolt action with mechanical precision while maintaining accuracy that put bullets exactly where they needed to be. The weapons intelligence seemed to confirm their superiority. Captured American M1903. Springfield rifles were examined and found to be well made but unremarkable. Bolt-action rifles with 5-round magazines, no different in principle from weapons Japanese forces had faced and defeated throughout Asia. If the Americans had any secret weapons, surely Japanese intelligence would have discovered them by now. But as the minutes tick toward the assault hour, strange reports filter back from listening posts. American voices carried differently across the water, more relaxed, less desperate than expected. And those sounds during the day? Weapons fire that came in bursts and patterns that didn't match bolt-action timing. Captain Nishimura tries to push down the growing unease. His Type 99 Arisaka is a superb weapon. Accurate, reliable, powerful enough to drop an enemy at 400 meters with a single shot. The 7.7mm cartridge hits harder than most rifles in the world. Japanese doctrine calls for aimed fire, not spray and pray tactics. One shot, one kill. the way of the warrior. The final preparations begin in the pre-dawn darkness. Bayonets are fixed to rifle muzzles with the soft click of steel on steel. Ammunition is redistributed, each man carrying exactly what he'll need for the brief, violent assault that will drive the Marines into the sea. The Arisaka Type 99s are loaded and ready, bolts closed on chambered rounds. In 10 minutes, we advance, comes the whispered command down the line. Remember, disciplined fire, aimed shots, make every bullet count. The Emperor is watching. As they prepare to move out, Sergeant Tanaka can't shake the memory of yesterday's strange sounds from American positions, but surely it's nothing more than nerves. His Arisaka has never failed him, and Japanese marksmanship has never been matched by any Western army. The assault force begins its final approach to the creek, 917 soldiers armed with the finest bolt-action rifles in the world, confident in tactics that have brought them victory after victory. They have no way of knowing they're about to face a weapon that will make their Arisaka rifles seem as obsolete as samurai swords, a weapon that will fire 8 rounds as fast as a man can pull the trigger without ever needing to work a bolt. In less than an hour, the sound of semi-automatic fire will shatter Japanese military confidence forever. At exactly 1:30 a.m., Colonel Ichiki raises his sword. The blade catches the last starlight before clouds swallow the sky, and 917 Japanese soldiers surge forward toward what they believe will be another easy victory. Captain Nishimura leads his company across the sandbar, his boots splashing through ankle-deep water as the tide retreats. Around him, the distinctive sound of Arisaka bolts cycling fills the air, click-clack, click-clack, as his men chamber rounds and advance in perfect formation. This is how Japanese infantry fights: disciplined, precise, unstoppable. The first Marine positions appear through the mist like ghosts materialized from nightmare. Nishimura raises his Type 99, sights on a muzzle flash, and squeezes the trigger. The rifle barks, and he immediately works the bolt, click-clack, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering another round. 1 second to aim, 1 second to fire, 2 seconds to cycle the bolt and acquire a new target. This is the rhythm of bolt-action warfare, perfected through decades of training. But then something impossible happens. From the Marine positions comes a sound that makes no sense. A rapid pop, 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 pop that cuts through the night like a machine gun, but it's not machine gun fire. It's too controlled, too precise, too personal. What is that sound? Nishimura shouts to Sergeant Tanaka, but Tanaka is staring in horrified fascination at the muzzle flashes across the creek. Where there should be single shots followed by the pause of bolt operation, there's continuous fire. Not the wild spray of automatic weapons, but aimed, deliberate shots coming faster than any bolt-action rifle should be able to fire. Private Yamamoto, charging beside him, suddenly spins and drops. Then Private Sato, then Corporal Nakamura. Not one at a time the way men fall to aimed rifle fire, but in rapid succession, as if the Americans are somehow firing multiple shots in the time it takes a Japanese soldier to cycle his bolt once. Nishimura works his Arisaka bolt frantically, click-clack, chambers another round, aims, fires. But in the time it takes him to complete this cycle, he hears 8 distinct shots from a single American position directly in front of him. 8 shots, in the time it takes him to fire once. Impossible, he screams, but the evidence is all around him. Japanese soldiers are falling faster than they can be replaced, not because the Americans are better marksmen, but because they're firing impossibly fast. Each American seems to have the firepower of 3 or 4 Japanese soldiers. Sergeant Tanaka drops to one knee, working his bolt with the mechanical precision drilled into him since basic training. Click, clack, aim, fire, click, clack, aim, fire. But the American across from him is maintaining a steady rhythm of fire that never pauses, never slows, never stops for bolt operation. They're not using bolt-action rifles, Tanaka shouts over the growing chaos. Those aren't Springfields. The realization hits Captain Nishimura like a physical blow. The Americans aren't fighting with bolt-action rifles at all. They're using some kind of semi-automatic weapon, a rifle that fires as fast as a man can pull the trigger without ever needing to work a bolt. But that's impossible. Intelligence had been clear. The Americans were equipped with M1903 Springfield rifles, the same bolt-action technology Japan had been facing and defeating for 4 years. How could they have developed and fielded a semi-automatic rifle without Japanese intelligence discovering it? The answer comes in the form of that distinctive ping that cuts through the battle, the sound of an empty 8-round clip ejecting from an American rifle. But before Nishimura can process what that sound means, it's followed immediately by the resumption of rapid fire as the American soldier slams in a fresh clip and continues shooting. 8 rounds. The Americans are carrying rifles that hold 8 rounds and fire them as fast as a man can squeeze the trigger. Around him, the assault is disintegrating. Japanese soldiers trained for 40 years in the supremacy of aimed bolt-action fire are being mowed down by Americans who can fire 3 times as fast. The tactical advantage that has carried the Imperial Army to victory after victory across Asia is being shattered by American semi-automatic firepower. "Fall back!" Nishimura screams, but there's nowhere to fall back to. Colonel Ichiki, convinced this would be a quick victory against demoralized Marines, has committed his entire force to a frontal assault across open ground. And that ground is now a killing field swept by semi-automatic fire that makes Japanese bolt-action rifles seem like relics from another century. Private Yamamoto, somehow still alive despite a bullet through his shoulder, staggers toward Nishimura. "Captain-san, what are those weapons? They fire like machine guns, but they're aimed like rifles." Before Nishimura can answer, the American counterattack begins. Marine reinforcements surge forward, and now he can see the weapons that are destroying his regiment. They look like rifles, shoulder-fired, aimed weapons, but they're pouring out sustained fire without pause for bolt operation. One American Marine, barely 20 years old, works his way through Nishimura's company with methodical precision. 8 shots, ping, reload, 8 more shots, ping, reload. In the time it takes Nishimura to fire twice with his Arisaka, this single American has fired 16 aimed rounds. The mathematical reality is devastating. If each American can fire 8 rounds to every 3 Japanese rounds, then 2,000 Marines with semi-automatic rifles have the firepower of 5,000 Japanese soldiers with bolt actions. The 1st Marine Division isn't undermanned, it's actually outgunning the entire Japanese assault force. "This is what defeat sounds like," Sergeant Tanaka whispers as he lies bleeding in the sand, listening to the rapid pop, 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 pop of American semi-automatic fire cutting down the last of their attack. "This is the sound of our rifles becoming obsolete." By 5 a.m., as Marine tanks roll across the sandbar, crushing everything in their path, the tactical revolution is complete. Of 917 Japanese soldiers who charged across that sandbar with supreme confidence in their bolt-action rifles, only 15 will survive to tell the tale. Captain Nishimura, crawling through the surf with a bullet in his leg, looks back at the carnage and understands with crystal clarity what has just happened. The Americans haven't just won a battle. They've made the Arisaka Type 99, the pride of Japanese small arms manufacturing, tactically obsolete overnight. The semi-automatic rifle, this weapon the Americans call the M1 Garand, has just changed the fundamental mathematics of infantry combat. And Japan, with its factories full of bolt-action rifles and its doctrine built around single-shot precision, is suddenly fighting World War II with World War I weapons. As the sun rises over Guadalcanal, painting the beach red with the blood of the Ichiki Regiment, one terrible truth becomes clear. Every Japanese soldier in the Pacific is now carrying a rifle that fires 3 times slower than his American counterpart. The strategic implications are staggering. If the Americans can mass-produce semi-automatic rifles while Japan remains locked into bolt-action technology, every future battle will see Japanese forces outgunned by 3-to-1 firepower ratios. The weapon that was supposed to be Japan's backbone, the precision Arisaka rifle, has just become its Achilles heel. The 15 survivors of the Ichiki Regiment who stagger back to Taivu Point carry more than wounds. They carry a revelation that will shake the Japanese military to its core. Captain Nishimura, his leg bandaged with torn uniform fabric, sits in the regimental aid station and tries to explain the impossible to his commanding officers. They fire 8 rounds without working the bolt, he repeats for the 3rd time, knowing how insane it sounds. 8 rounds, then a metallic ping, then 8 more rounds immediately. No pause, no bolt operation. The rifle fires as fast as they can pull the trigger. The intelligence. Officers exchange glances. Semi-automatic rifles are theoretical weapons, experimental designs that exist in laboratories and testing facilities. The idea that the Americans have not only perfected such a weapon, but mass-produced and fielded it to every infantry soldier seems impossible. But the evidence is undeniable. Radio intercepts from American positions reveal they call their weapon the M1 Garand, named after its Canadian-American designer, John Garand. As Japanese intelligence pieces together the shocking truth, they realize the Americans have achieved something the Japanese military considered a fantasy: a semi-automatic rifle reliable enough for frontline infantry use. The implications cascade through Japanese strategic planning like falling dominoes. If every American soldier can fire 3 times faster than every Japanese soldier, then Japan's numerical superiority in the Pacific is meaningless. The 164th Infantry Regiment, arriving at Guadalcanal in October 1942, will demonstrate this reality when Army soldiers armed with M1 Garands integrate seamlessly with Marine forces and multiply American firepower exponentially. Lieutenant Colonel John B. George, serving with the 164th, will later write, "This rifle was probably the very best in the war, and the best military hand weapon ever placed on the battlefield. As Army units with M1 Garands fight alongside Marines still carrying bolt-action M1903 Springfields, the difference becomes stark. Marines observe firsthand the enormous increase in firepower that Army forces enjoy with their Garand rifles. By December 1942, desperate Japanese engineers at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal begin the frantic process of reverse engineering captured M1 Garand rifles. Working around the clock, they modify American rifles to fire Japanese 7.7 by 58 mm ammunition, discovering that the semi-automatic action can indeed function with their cartridges. But copying the Garand's complex gas-operated system proves infinitely more challenging than Japanese metallurgy and manufacturing can quickly master. The result is the Type 4 rifle, Japan's desperate attempt to match American firepower. But by the time prototype Type 4 rifles reach limited production in late 1944, it's far too late. American factories have produced over 5 million M1 Garand rifles, while Japanese industry manages to complete fewer than 100 Type 4 rifles before surrender in August 1945. The psychological impact on Japanese forces is as devastating as the tactical disadvantage. Soldiers who had carried their Arisaka rifles with pride now understand they're carrying weapons that make them sitting ducks. Every firefight becomes a race against time. Japanese soldiers working their bolts frantically while Americans pour out rapid fire that leaves no opportunity for aimed response. Marine Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, wielding machine guns at Henderson Field, will earn the Medal of Honor, partly because M1 Garand-equipped infantry can provide the sustained supporting fire his crew-served weapons need. The integration of semi-automatic rifles into American infantry tactics creates a combined arms effect that Japanese bolt-action doctrine simply cannot match. The technological revolution spreads beyond individual weapons to reshape entire military doctrines. American squads armed with Garands can suppress enemy positions while maneuvering, something impossible with bolt-action rifles that require soldiers to stop, aim, fire, and cycle bolts. Japanese forces, trained in tactics built around bolt-action limitations, find themselves tactically obsolete overnight. General George S. Patton will call the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised. But for Japanese survivors like Captain Nishimura, it represents something else entirely. The moment their military supremacy died on a sandbar in the Solomon Islands. Today, military analysts recognize Guadalcanal as the moment when technological advantage shifted decisively to the Allies. The M1 Garand didn't just win battles. It demonstrated how rapidly military technology can evolve to make entire armies obsolete. In our modern era of hypersonic missiles, artificial intelligence, and drone warfare, the lesson remains urgent. The military that fails to innovate doesn't just lose advantages, it loses wars. The sound that haunted Captain Nishimura's nightmares, that rapid pop, 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 pop of semi-automatic fire, was the sound of the future arriving on the battlefield. It was the sound of American industrial innovation turning the tide of World War II, one trigger pull at a time. What military technology today might be creating similar nightmares for our adversaries? The M1. Garand's legacy reminds us that in warfare, technological surprise doesn't just change battles, it changes history. The tropical dawn breaks over Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, February 12, 1943. Steam rises from the coral runway as 24 strange-looking aircraft sit in the humid morning air like giant predatory birds. Their wings bend downward in an unnatural gull shape. Their massive propellers catch the orange light filtering through palm fronds. The sound of the surf breaking against distant coral reefs mingles with the nervous chatter of Marine pilots checking their gear one final time. Major William Gies runs his weathered hand along the wing of his F-4U Corsair, feeling the cold metal warm under the rising sun. At 32, he's seen enough combat to know when something is about to change forever. Behind him, First Lieutenant Ken Walsh adjusts his flight helmet with hands that refuse to stay steady. Walsh earned his wings as a private 6 years ago, the hard way, through sheer determination and countless hours of training. But nothing has prepared him for this moment. 25 hours, Walsh mutters to himself, checking his watch. That's all any of them have in these new machines. 25 precious hours of flight time in aircraft that promise to revolutionize air combat. Around him, 23 other Marine pilots face the same terrifying reality. They're about to take untested fighters into combat against an enemy who has ruled Pacific skies for over 3 years. The Japanese Zero has become a legend of invincibility. For 39 months, Japanese pilots have carved through American formations like wolves through sheep. Marines die daily in their obsolete Grumman Wildcats. Brave men in inferior machines, unable to catch the high-altitude bombers that pound Henderson Field every night. The Betty bombers come in fast and high, escorted by Zeros that dance around American fighters like deadly ballet dancers, untouchable and merciless. But today feels different. Today, something new is about to enter the Pacific War. Jisei looks at his men and sees the mixture of excitement and terror in their eyes. These bent-wing birds represent hope, maybe their first real chance to fight the Japanese on equal terms. The Corsair's massive Pratt and Whitney engine produces 2,000 horsepower, nearly double that of their old Wildcats. The whispered promises from test pilots speak of speeds over 400 miles per hour, climb rates that defy belief, and firepower that could shred a Zero in seconds. The question hanging in the humid morning air isn't whether these Marines are ready for the Corsair. The question is whether the Japanese are ready for what's about to hunt them down in the Pacific skies. As the first engines cough to life with thunderous roars that shake the palm trees, no one, not the nervous American pilots, not the confident Japanese aces preparing for another routine day of aerial superiority, understands that this moment will mark the beginning of the end of Japanese air power in the Pacific. The Corsair is about to earn a nickname that will haunt Japanese pilots for the rest of the war: Whistling Death. 3,000 miles north, Japanese naval air pilot First Class Hiroyoshi Nishizawa adjusts his leather-flying helmet in the ready room at Rabaul. At 21, he's already Japan's most feared ace, with 36 confirmed kills painted on the side of his pristine A6M0. His fellow pilots call him the Devil, not for his personality, which remains quietly reserved, but for his supernatural ability to appear from nowhere and send American fighters spinning into the ocean in flames. Nishizawa has reason to feel confident this morning. For 3 years, he and pilots like him have dominated every air battle in the Pacific. The American Wildcats are predictable, slow, and vulnerable. Their pilots are brave but inexperienced, flying machines that turn like freight trains compared to the graceful Zero. The morning briefing promises another routine interception. American bombers heading for Bougainville, escorted by the same obsolete fighters that have provided easy targets for months. The Americans never learn, mutters Warrant Officer Saburo Sakai, adjusting his flight goggles. At 29, Sakai is one of Japan's most experienced pilots, a veteran of the China campaign who has watched American air power grow stronger but never truly dangerous. They send their bombers with the same escort fighters. They refuse to adapt. But Sakai's confidence masks a growing concern that he shares with no one. Japanese pilot training has become increasingly rushed as experienced instructors die in combat. The new pilots arriving at Rabaul have barely 200 flight hours, men who would have been considered unfit for combat just 2 years ago. The Americans, meanwhile, seem to have an endless supply of replacement aircraft and pilots. Still, the Zero remains supreme. Its ability to outmaneuver any American fighter at low speeds has become legendary. Nishizawa can put his Zero through turns that would cause American fighters to stall and fall like stones. The plane's 20mm cannon can tear the wing off a Wildcat with a single well-placed burst. Most importantly, the Zero's incredible range allows Japanese pilots to choose their battles, attacking when conditions favor them and withdrawing when they don't. What none of the Japanese pilots gathering for the morning mission understand is that their technological advantage is about to evaporate in a matter of minutes. Back at Henderson Field, Ken Walsh struggles into the cockpit of his Corsair, immediately struck by how different everything feels. The seat sits much higher than in his old Wildcat. The engine cowling stretches impossibly far ahead of him. The massive propeller creates a blind spot that makes taxi operations dangerous. He literally cannot see directly in front of the aircraft while on the ground. Engine start procedures, Walsh recites to himself, running through the checklist with sweating palms. The Pratt and Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine contains 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows of 9, each cylinder as large as a coffee can. When he hits the starter, the sound is unlike anything he's experienced, a deep, rumbling thunder that seems to shake the entire island. Major G's voice crackles through the radio. "Gentlemen, today we escort Army B-24s to Bougainville. The Japanese will come up to meet us, probably in superior numbers. Our job is simple: protect the bombers and learn what these birds can do in combat." What Gize doesn't say, what he can't say without destroying morale, is that they're essentially test pilots flying experimental aircraft into combat. The Navy rejected the Corsair for carrier operations due to visibility problems and tricky landing characteristics. The Marines received them almost by accident, a consolation prize that might turn into a death trap. As the formation taxis toward the runway, the Corsairs create an otherworldly sound. The air intakes on their massive engines produce a distinctive whistling noise that carries for miles. Marine ground crews have nicknamed it the Whistling Death, but they have no idea how prophetic that name will prove to be. Lieutenant Walsh feels the Corsair's power as he lines up for takeoff. The engine produces so much torque that it tries to pull the aircraft sideways during the takeoff roll. The acceleration is intoxicating and terrifying. Nothing in his experience has prepared him for the raw power pressing him back into his seat as the bent-wing fighter leaps into the tropical sky. Climbing through 10,000 feet, Walsh begins to understand what they've been given. The Corsair climbs like an elevator, reaching altitudes that would take his old Wildcat twice as long to achieve. The controls feel responsive and powerful, the aircraft eager to fight despite its size and weight. But questions gnaw at every pilot in the formation. Will the Corsair's speed advantage overcome its unfamiliarity? Can they master its quirks before meeting Japanese aces who know every trick in aerial combat? Most critically, will their minimal experience in these machines prove fatal when the bullets start flying? As VMF 124 heads north toward Bougainville, Japanese radar operators begin tracking an incoming American formation. The routine report crackles across Japanese radio frequencies. 24 enemy fighters and bombers approaching from the southeast. What the radar operators don't report, what they cannot possibly know, is that the nature of aerial warfare in the Pacific is about to change forever. The engagement begins at 25,000 feet, 40 miles southeast of Bougainville, at exactly 1:47 p.m. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa spots the American formation first, a familiar sight of lumbering B-24 bombers surrounded by escort fighters. But something immediately strikes him as wrong. The escort fighters look different, larger, with wings that bend in an unnatural gull shape. He's never seen anything like them. Unidentified American fighters, he radios to his squadron leader. New type, unknown capabilities. Lieutenant Ken Walsh sees the Japanese Zeros climbing toward them like a swarm of angry hornets. 18 deadly aircraft flown by some of Japan's most experienced pilots. His heart pounds as he realizes this is it, the moment that will determine whether the Corsair is a game changer or an expensive mistake. The Japanese attack comes with textbook precision. Nishizawa leads 6 Zeros in a high-speed diving attack, expecting the American fighters to turn toward them in the predictable defensive maneuver that has cost so many Wildcat pilots their lives. Every Japanese pilot knows the routine. The Americans will try to turn fight, the Zeros will outmaneuver them, and the slaughter will begin. But something incredible happens instead. Major Giza doesn't turn toward the attacking Zeros. Instead, he pushes his Corsair's nose down and accelerates straight ahead. Walsh and the other Marines follow their leader's example, and suddenly 18 Corsairs are diving away from the Japanese fighters at speeds that defy belief. Nishizawa watches in stunned amazement as the American fighters pull away from his diving Zeros like they're standing still. His Zero, considered the fastest fighter in the Pacific, tops out at 350 miles per hour in a dive. The strange new American fighters are easily doing 450 miles per hour and still accelerating. "Impossible," he whispers into his radio. "They're too fast." Walsh feels the Corsair's incredible power as they dive past 400 miles per hour. The airframe remains solid and controllable at speeds that would tear apart his old Wildcat. Through his radio, he hears Major Giesi's calm voice. "Level out and climb." "We're going to show them what boom and zoom tactics look like." The Corsairs level out at 20,000 feet and immediately begin climbing back toward the Japanese formation. The massive Pratt and Whitney engines pull them upward at a rate that leaves the Japanese pilots struggling to comprehend what they're witnessing. In less than 3 minutes, the Marines have regained their altitude advantage and are positioning for their own attack. Saburo Sakai, flying wing position with Nishizawa, feels a cold knot forming in his stomach. In 3 years of combat, he has never seen American fighters that could outclimb a Zero. The new aircraft seem to violate everything he understands about aerial combat. They're large and heavy, yet they climb like rockets. They're single-engine fighters, yet they're faster than anything the Japanese have ever encountered. "Attack formation," Giesi calls over the radio. "Remember your training. Speed is life. Altitude is life insurance. Use both." The Corsairs attack in pairs, diving from above at devastating speed. Walsh picks out a Zero below him and pushes, his stick forward, feeling the aircraft accelerate past 450 miles per hour. The target grows rapidly in his gun sight, a beautiful, pristine A6M painted in the green and gray camouflage of the Imperial Japanese Navy. At 300 yards, Walsh opens fire with all 6.50 caliber machine guns. The Corsair carries twice the firepower of his old Wildcat, and the effect is immediate and shocking. His first burst tears through the Zero's unarmored fuel tank, and the Japanese fighter disappears in a ball of orange flame so bright it hurts to look at. "Got one!" Walsh shouts into his radio, pulling up from his attack and climbing back to altitude. The maneuver would have been impossible in a Wildcat. The old fighter lacked the power to regain altitude after a high-speed diving attack. But the Corsair climbs away from the engagement area, like it's rocket-powered. Nishizawa attempts to pursue the American who just shot down his wingman, but his Zero simply cannot match the Corsair's climbing performance. The American fighter pulls away vertically, gaining altitude until it's nothing more than a dot against the blue sky. For the first time in his combat career, Nishizawa feels helpless. The battle becomes a nightmare for the Japanese pilots. Every time they maneuver to attack the bombers, the Corsairs dive on them from above at impossible speeds. The American fighters hit like thunderbolts, firing devastating bursts from their 6 machine guns before climbing back to altitude faster than any Zero can follow. Warrant Officer Tetsuzo Iwamoto, Japan's third highest scoring ace, finds himself in a turning fight with a Corsair pilot who makes a critical mistake. He tries to turn with a more maneuverable Zero. But even this advantage proves temporary. When Iwamoto gets on the American's tail and closes for the kill, the Corsair pilot simply pushes his throttle forward and accelerates straight ahead. The Zero cannot match the American fighter's speed in level flight, and Iwamoto watches his target disappear into the distance. "They won't fight," he radios in frustration. "They refuse to engage properly." But the Japanese pilots are wrong. The Americans aren't refusing to fight. They're fighting smarter. Walsh and his squadron mates are using the Corsair's superior speed and climb rate to dictate the terms of engagement. They attack when they choose, disengage when they want, and never allow the Japanese fighters to use their superior maneuverability advantage. As the battle continues, the psychological impact on the Japanese pilots becomes devastating. For 3 years, they have owned the Pacific skies through superior equipment and training. Now, suddenly, they're facing American fighters that are faster, more powerful, and seemingly invulnerable to their proven tactics. Lieutenant Takeo Okumura, a veteran Zero pilot with 14 kills, lines up behind a Corsair and opens fire with his 20mm cannon. His first burst hits the American fighter squarely in the fuselage, strikes that would cripple or destroy any previous American fighter. But the Corsair absorbs the punishment without visible effect. The aircraft's rugged construction, designed for carrier operations, proves nearly impervious to damage that would be fatal to the lightweight Zero. The American pilot, Lieutenant Robert Hansen of VMF 124, feels the cannon shells strike his aircraft but maintains control. His Corsair shudders under the impact but continues flying. In his old Wildcat, those hits would have sent him into the ocean. The Corsair's armor plating and robust design save his life. Hansen rolls his damaged Corsair into a shallow dive and accelerates away from his attacker. Okumura follows, pushing his Zero to maximum speed, but the damaged American fighter still pulls away effortlessly. The Japanese pilot watches helplessly as his target escapes, unable to comprehend how a battle-damaged aircraft can outrun his undamaged Zero. The engagement lasts 18 minutes. When the smoke clears, 7 Japanese fighters have been shot down, including 2 flown by veteran aces. The Americans lose 1 Corsair, not to Japanese fighters, but to ground fire from Bougainville's anti-aircraft guns. The B-24 bombers complete their mission untouched, protected by escorts the Japanese cannot catch or outfight. As the surviving Zeros limp back to Rabaul, the Japanese pilots sit in stunned silence. Everything they thought they knew about aerial combat has been turned upside down in less than 20 minutes. Nishizawa stares at his fuel gauge and realizes something that chills him to the bone. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, Japanese pilots are afraid of American fighters. The radio reports flooding into Japanese headquarters at Rabaul that evening tell a story that senior officers refuse to believe. New American fighter, unprecedented speed, cannot be engaged. The words seem impossible to experienced commanders who have watched their pilots dominate Pacific skies for 3 years. But Lieutenant Ken Walsh sits in his quarters on Guadalcanal, cleaning his goggles with hands that finally stopped shaking, and knows that everything has changed forever. In 18 minutes of combat, he witnessed the balance of air power shift decisively toward the Americans. The Corsair isn't just a new fighter. It's a revolution in aerial warfare that renders Japanese tactics obsolete overnight. We couldn't catch them, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa confides to Saburo Sakai as they walk across the darkened runway at Rabaul. For the first time in his career, Japan's greatest ace sounds defeated. They decided when to fight and when to run. We couldn't force an engagement on our terms. This psychological transformation proves more devastating than the physical losses. Japanese pilots who once approached every engagement with supreme confidence now face a terrible uncertainty. What if American technology has finally caught up with Japanese skill? The impact ripples through the Pacific War with shocking speed. Within weeks, reports pour in from across the theater of strange new American fighters that refuse to be caught or outmaneuvered. Japanese pilots begin developing what flight surgeons will later recognize as combat fatigue, not from exhaustion, but from the stress of facing an enemy they cannot defeat with proven tactics. Ken Walsh returns to combat 2 months later and shoots down 3 Zeros in a single engagement, becoming the first Corsair ace. His victory represents more than personal achievement. It symbolizes the technological revolution that will carry American forces across the Pacific to Japan itself. The Corsair's success creates a cascading effect that Japanese strategic planners never anticipated. American bomber formations, once vulnerable targets that required massive fighter escorts, now operate with near impunity under Corsair protection. Japanese bases that seem secure behind rings of Zero fighters suddenly become vulnerable to round-the-clock bombing attacks. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, who will later command the famous Black Sheep Squadron, describes the Corsair's impact perfectly. The Japanese had to completely rethink how they fought us. For 3 years, they could count on superior maneuverability to win any engagement. Suddenly, that advantage meant nothing if they couldn't catch us to use it. The statistics tell the story of this technological revolution in stark numbers. Corsair pilots achieve an 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft throughout the Pacific War. By 1945, Japanese pilots fear the distinctive whistle of the Corsair's air intake so much that the sound alone causes formations to scatter before American fighters even come into visual range. But the deeper impact extends far beyond tactical victories. The Corsair demonstrates that American industrial might can not only match Japanese innovation, but surpass it decisively. The aircraft represents everything Japan cannot compete with: massive engines requiring rare metals, precision manufacturing demanding advanced industrial techniques, and design philosophies that prioritize pilot survival over aircraft weight. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, the Devil, who once ruled Pacific skies, dies in November 1944. Not in aerial combat, but as a passenger in a transport aircraft shot down by American fighters. His death symbolizes the complete reversal of air power that began with the Corsair's first combat mission. Today, aviation historians recognize February 13, 1943, as the day American forces gained air superiority in the Pacific War. But for the men who lived through that transformation, both American Marines who discovered they finally had the tools to fight back, and Japanese pilots who realized their technological advantage had evaporated, the memory remains intensely personal. The Corsair didn't just change the outcome of battles. It changed the fundamental nature of aerial warfare, proving that superior technology, properly employed, could overcome years of tactical experience and training. In 18 minutes over Bougainville, the age of Japanese air supremacy ended, and American industrial might begin writing the final chapters of the Pacific War. The bent-wing fighters that Marines feared to fly became the instruments of Japanese defeat, whistling death from American skies that would never again belong to the rising sun. Want to see how American industrial might continue to reshape the Pacific War? Check out our video on the Essex-class carriers that brought the fight to Japan's doorstep.